There's a certain kind of silence that happens right before a difficult conversation really begins. Not the comfortable kind. Not the kind where people are just resting in each other's presence. But the kind where you can feel something building underneath. Like everyone in the room knows where this is going even if nobody has said it yet. And that's the feeling that keeps coming back to me when I think about how All in the Family handles conversations about race, not as distant social commentary, but as something that enters the room slowly, awkwardly, and then refuses to leave. And there's one kind of situation, one type of episode that really brings this into focus, where the entire emotional weight of the story doesn't come from what happens, but from what is said, how it's said, and how people react to it in real time, and it usually starts in that familiar living room, that space that feels almost too small for the size of the ideas being discussed. It begins simply, almost casually, maybe with the mention of a visitor or a story about someone Archie encountered during the day. And at first, it sounds like any other conversation, something that might pass without much attention. But then Archie frames it in his own way, and that's where everything shifts. Because he doesn't present his thoughts as prejudice, not consciously, not deliberately. He presents them as observations, as things he believes are obvious, as something that doesn't need to be questioned. And that's what makes it so revealing, because the bias isn't hidden, but it isn't labeled either. It just exists in the way he talks. And there's a moment, a small pause, where the room absorbs what he said, and then Mike reacts, because he can't let it pass, not this time, not when the assumptions are so clear, so deeply embedded. His response isn't just disagreement. It's an attempt to unpack what Archie has said, to break it down, to expose the logic behind it, and to show where that logic fails. And as he speaks, the tone of the room changes. Gloria feels it immediately because for her, this isn't just an intellectual debate. It's emotional. It's about fairness, about dignity, about the kind of world she believes in. And her reactions carry that urgency, that sense that this matters in a very real way. And then there's who listens in that quiet, attentive way, not interrupting, not escalating, but absorbing everything. And when she speaks, it's not to argue, it's to humanize, to bring the conversation back to something softer, something more compassionate. What makes this dynamic so powerful is that the argument doesn't unfold like a traditional sitcom setup. There's no clear joke structure, no setup and punchline. Instead, the humor emerges from the discomfort, from the tension, from the way people talk past each other and then try again. Archie might double down on his perspective, repeating himself, reinforcing his point, not because he's trying to be cruel, but because he genuinely believes he's right, and that belief becomes the driving force of the conflict. Mike pushes harder, trying different angles, sometimes calm, sometimes frustrated, and you can feel the conversation stretching, pulling in different directions. Gloria adds emotional weight, reacting not just to the words but to what they represent, and softens the edges, creating small moments where the tension doesn't disappear but becomes more bearable. And the living room setting makes all of this feel immediate, almost intimate, because there's no distance, no shift in location to break the rhythm. Everything happens right there in that shared space, where every word lands and lingers. As the conversation continues, you start to notice how it doesn't move toward resolution. It moves in circles. It builds and then pauses and then builds again. And that's because the issue itself isn't something that can be solved in a single discussion. It's too deeply rooted, too connected to identity, to experience, to the way each character sees the world. And that's where the show becomes something more than just entertainment, because it doesn't simplify the conversation. It doesn't turn it into a lesson with a clear takeaway. It lets it remain complicated. Archie's worldview, shaped by his upbringing, by his environment, by the era he grew up in, isn't presented as something that can be easily dismantled. It's presented as something that exists, something that has to be confronted but not easily erased. Mike's perspective, rooted in change and progress, challenges that worldview, but it doesn't automatically replace it. It just creates friction, tension, movement. Gloria brings in the emotional reality of that tension, the way it affects relationships, the way it feels to be caught between love and disagreement. And with her kindness, introduces a different kind of response, one that doesn't rely on argument but on empathy, on seeing people as individuals rather than categories. And that's where the show's approach to race becomes so groundbreaking, especially in the context of 1970s America, because it doesn't present race as a distant issue, something happening somewhere else. It brings it into the home, into everyday conversation. At a time when television often avoided these topics or treated them in a more way, this show leaned into the discomfort, into the awkwardness, into the reality that these conversations are rarely clean or easy. And the humor plays a crucial role in that, because it allows the audience to engage with the tension without turning away from it. You might laugh at the way Archie expresses himself, at the confidence he has in his own perspective, even when it's clearly flawed, and then you might laugh at Mike's attempts to challenge that perspective, at the way the conversation keeps circling without resolution. But that laughter is always layered. It's never just about the joke. It's about what the joke reveals, about the underlying truth that sits beneath it. As the scene unfolds, there's often a moment where everything feels like it might break, where the tension reaches a peak, where the voices are louder, the emotions more visible, and then something shifts. Not dramatically, not with a clear solution, but with a small change in tone. Maybe says something gentle, something that reframes the moment, or someone pauses, takes a breath, steps back slightly, and the intensity eases just enough to keep the conversation from collapsing. But nothing is resolved. Archie doesn't suddenly change his beliefs. Mike doesn't fully succeed in reshaping the conversation. Gloria doesn't find a perfect balance, and kindness doesn't erase the conflict. And that's what makes it feel real, because that's how these conversations actually happen. They don't end with clarity, they end with a pause, with the understanding that the discussion will continue in some form later. Watching it now, you can still feel how relevant it is, because the way race is discussed, the way assumptions are revealed through conversation, the way people struggle to understand each other, that hasn't gone away. The specifics may have changed, the language may be different, but the dynamic, the tension, the discomfort, it all feels familiar. And that's what gives the show its lasting impact, because it doesn't rely on the moment it was created in. It taps into something ongoing, something that continues to shape conversations today. As the living room grows quiet again, as the characters settle back into their routines, there's a sense that something has been exposed, not solved, not fixed, but revealed. And that revelation lingers. It stays with you, it makes you think. It makes you reflect on how these kinds of conversations happen in your own life, in your own space. And maybe that's the most powerful thing the show does. It doesn't tell you what to think. It shows you how people think, how they speak, how they reveal themselves without even realizing it. So when the moment ends, when the conversation fades, it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a pause, like the discussion is still happening somewhere, still unfolding, still shaped by the same tensions. And that's the kind of storytelling that doesn't fade because it doesn't rely on resolution. It relies on recognition, on the quiet realization that what you've just seen isn't confined to a single episode. It's part of something larger, something that continues.